Hey, welcome to Cade's Kaleidoscope. This is your resource for holistic health, sobriety, and travel. And on today's episode, I'm here with
Luiza. Thank you for having me.
we're talking about our own mental health and about our distinct journeys with our mental health. At this point in the podcast, Luiza tells a story which we later decided to edit out.
Eventually I made it back home, but I don't remember after that. I passed out, and then I remember waking up and realizing that I'd had this like horrible nightmare dream, I guess. And at that point I was struggling pretty bad mentally, and so I had a lot of mental health issues going on that really a lot of people didn't know about.
And just to clarify, you were about 15?
Yep.
And you're born and raised, born in Iași, Romania.
Partially raised in Romania.
Yeah.
Yep. And so my thoughts during that time were more on the darker side, you could say, and I'm sure my dreams and things like that reflected it. But I had this nightmare that even to this day, it still feels like I just had it yesterday. And it was so random, but the nightmare was I was stuck inside this jail cell.
Okay.
And it was just me. And supposedly I was naked, but that's kind of vague in my memory. And I was stuck in this cell with like 3 or 4 half human babies / half like monkeys / they wanted to like tear me apart, literally. And I mean, you can imagine like the cute little baby monkey thing from the commercials, the Dorito commercial or whatever it came from. I can't remember, but it was nothing like that. Like, you're talking dark, demonic looking creature. So it was pretty scary, and it left a huge impact on me. And at that point, I realized that I was really fighting for my own life, because I wanted to get drunk to the point where I could hopefully end things. And obviously that didn't happen, but thank God. But it was really dark, and I had never had a dream like that before in my life. And I actually didn't tell anyone about it for a good probably 4 or 5 years, because it was so dark. And I don't know, I grew up really conservative, and everything was always happy-go-lucky, so having a dream like this, I didn't feel comfortable telling anyone.
Yeah, and I wanted to chime in here.
And I'm sure it had some significance.
Yeah. Luiza and I both were raised Luiza partially raised in the United States, myself completely raised in the United States, and we were raised in Protestant churches. I was part of a Baptist church in Sandpoint, Idaho, and then a Nazarene church, and then an evangelical covenant, but they're all pretty similar in terms of being a Protestant evangelical kind of Christianity, and Luiza grew up with parents who raised her in that as well. So we were never really we never interpreted our dreams that much. There are Christians who will, my parents would talk me, say sweet dreams, and we would sometimes talk about our dreams, and dreams were cool, but we never interpreted them as a science, which I'm doing today. And I've been able to lucid dream also, which is that's a subject for another podcast. But in my own mental health, I have been able to get some answers thanks to my dreams.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell a story here. I remember probably 3.5 years ago, I had just finished being a backpacker in Latin America for 14 months, for a year and 2 months, a year and some change.
That's a long time.
Yeah. And that trip culminated with a complete break from reality. I got to a point of schizophrenia where I was living on the streets in Mérida, Mexico, and sleeping on the streets. I had lost I had purposefully given away my cell phone and passport and money, but I had misplaced my other forms of ID, and I didn't even have a debit card because it had been months ago since I lost a debit card to an ATM machine in Peru. And that's all to say, thank God I was able to be rescued from that situation. My dad made an emergency trip. He spent 4 days with me in the city of Mérida, Mexico.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Cool.
yeah, and he got me back on my feet, got me back on my meds. I'll go into more detail of that story in another podcast episode. But anyway, and my dad billed me. I ended up paying for my dad's trip, which I deserved.
Yep.
It wasn't too much. It was for his entire round trip flights and the food and lodging while he was with me. It was like $1,500.
Oh, well, that's not bad.
Yeah, it was fine. And anyway, I had to sell off part of my Roth IRA to pay for it.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but anyway, I was going to tell the story of returning to the United States after backpacking and being a solo traveler for a year. It was a somewhat traumatic experience for me. And I went through a depression, a small little miniature depression, a funk for 2 months. And one of those nights I was in the bedroom that I was raised in my parents'
wow.
house. They let me stay with them for a month for free, and then they charged me rent, which I deserved. I'm an adult, I can pay rent. And I had a dream that I was snorkeling in the water in a puddle of Jackson Sports Bar, which is on 48th and Tieton in Yakima, Washington. Yeah. And I remember waking up from that dream and seeing, okay, it's obvious why I had this dream.
Right.
This is my way of exploring something I already know. I spent from age 10 to 23 in Yakima, Washington, and I can learn how to snorkel, even if it's just in the parking lot of a bar. It's better than not snorkeling.
Right.
But this is after living and snorkeling every day in the Caribbean with exotic, seeing turtles and seeing dolphins and crazy beautiful fish and coral life and all that.
That's fun.
Yeah, so this is an episode about mental health. So that's all to say that on my journey, I have been able to analyze my own mental health status using my dreams, or really I write down a lot of my dreams, and that's just a way to journal. It's a way to study my own life and my own subconscious mind. So what else would you like to say about mental health in general for the audience of this podcast? Do you want a moment to think?
Probably the only thing I would probably chime in is that, I think it's really important to take away from the stigma that mental health has. I know a lot of people touch on this, even in podcasts or various series, but it is true, because you're going to get criticism for anything and everything you do, no matter what, from, whoever. And it doesn't matter if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, you're still going to get criticism. And so, in my opinion, when it comes to mental health, it's really important that you do tune into your own body's way of telling you, hey, it's time to take some rest, or it's time to, stop what you're doing and figure some things out. And there's nothing wrong with that. We live in such a go, go, go mentality, especially here in the United States, that, people don't take time. And that's why mental health is such a big deal, because they are so focused on their future. A lot of people don't take the time to think about their past or their present. And so it makes it hard to really live a fulfilled life if you don't really know, who you are or where you came from or why you're struggling with certain things, or, and I think dreams is a huge way of our mind and our body telling us that something, maybe we need to take a second look at something, or just think for a little bit, or rest, or whatever it might be. And mental health alone can be tiring. So to me, setting aside that time to really focus on yourself, it's not a selfish thing, and it's really important. And one thing that I did for myself was go to rehab. And even though I didn't have an addiction necessarily,
Well, I wanted to chime in here because it's important to clarify anybody can benefit from the 12 steps.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't have to be really down on your luck, rock bottom addict to benefit from going to rehab or working the steps.
Yeah.
So carry on. What was your addiction, or what were you in rehab for?
Well, this rehab program specifically had a PTSD program set aside, and that was what I went for, was for their PTSD. And I am so glad, because I took 30 days away from my family, and that's really hard to do anyways, but I took those 30 days because I knew it was the best thing for me to do at that time, and I learned more about myself, I learned more about my past, and I learned more about what my future holds. And if I hadn't taken just those 30 days, or however long, anybody does, for me, it was life-changing, and I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't. So it's really important to take time for yourself.
Amen. Now, I'd like to chime in here and explain that, my name is Preston. I'm the creator of this podcast. And when from age 10 to from age 10, I had insomnia sometimes. I would frequently just stay awake all night.
Yeah.
And when I was about 15 and in high school, my academics actually suffered from this because I would just lay awake all night trying to sleep, and then in school the next day fall asleep in class. And in high school I started, my father would take me to a store, and we would look for the strongest over-the-counter sleep medication. And those meds actually, they did help me sleep, but they also turned me into a zombie. They're so potent. Like, why do they have to be so potent? I would take half a tab and I would be out for 12 or 14 hours. But thankfully today I have found a balance that works a little better for me. I have a medication today that I took this last night.
Okay.
And every day in this season of life that I take this medication, I take something called risperidone, which is prescription only. And
I used to be on that.
Yeah, it's technically called an antipsychotic, I believe, but I would call it a tranquilizer or sleeping pill. What it does is it lowers the amount of electricity in the brain. So the brain functions with electric signals. And I had a pharmacist explain this to me once, that it was really a good explanation. Like, an antipsychotic or a mood stabilizer, what they can do is reduce your brain's reaction to the electric signals, or make the electricity less.
Yep.
And the same medications are given to people who have epilepsy, who have seizures. So
sometimes ADHD as well.
Oh, there you go.
That's a lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was 21, I was hospitalized. Yeah, I was hospitalized against my will. I was basically forced to voluntarily go to a psychiatric unit, and my life actually improved as a result. So I was lucky. I had friends working in this facility, and it was then called Memorial Hospital in Yakima. And
now it's not.
On on Tieton and 32nd up there.
Yep.
Yeah, up on the crest of the hill. And I had friends who were on staff at this hospital, and their way of treating me was through tranquilizing me, just putting me on absurd doses of tranquilizing medication. And
so you're a zombie pretty much the entire time you're there.
Yeah, zombie. Just I mean, my first 2 days I had the remaining energy from being in a manic state, but after 2 or 3 days the medications had really thoroughly adjusted to my system, so I was sleeping 12 to 14 hours a day or more.
Now, I do want to add something though.
Yeah.
Having also been in a psychiatric unit for almost 14 days, I also will say that do not think negatively about being a zombie, because honestly, sometimes that's what our body needs. We need to be in that restful state where we're not aware of all of our troubles and worries and problems that our brain chemically can't calm down by itself. And so a lot of people have a negative connotation when it comes to being in a psychiatric unit, and immediately you think of zombies walking around. But honestly, for some people, and not for everybody, but for some people that really struggle with this kind of mental health, it's what we need. And it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so rewinding in my story, when I was 21-ish, I was given the diagnosis of bipolar 2, bipolar disorder type 2. And my life actually did improve after being medicated.
Sure.
And I wish that the professionals had the time and resources to treat me in a holistic way. There was some talk of holistic approaches. There was some talk of exercise and diet, but the Band-Aid that they used was medications. And I'm 30 years old as we record this, and I've had three different times I've intentionally decided to go off my medications completely. And the first time, within 2 weeks of being off the meds, I put myself back on them because I wasn't sleeping. And then the second time that I went off my meds, I spent 4 months relatively sane and normal between Ecuador and Peru and Chile and Mexico. But those 4 months concluded with absolute schizophrenic level of bipolar. I mean, I was living on the streets and homeless and hallucinating conversations with Donald Trump, who was then the president. I went to jail. They let me out of jail, and then they took me back to jail in Mexico. And this was all in Spanish. So I've had hallucinations in Spanish and English and Portuguese and some sign language in French. So
you had quite the ringer.
Yeah.
And I would suggest, do not come and get off your meds, go back and forth like that without the advice of a doctor. Just an FYI, because that's why that happens.
Exactly. The third time so the second time I went off my meds, and I very much voluntarily went back on them when my dad showed up in Mexico with the task of getting me to a pharmacy and getting me medicated.
Your poor dad.
My poor dad. I put him through a tough time. He's a good guy, but I paid for his week in Mexico. And the third time in my life that I decided to go off my meds was a 6-month period, which coincided with being in a relationship with someone I'll call C. And I was with her for 6 months. And the 6 months that I was with her, she kind of talked me into trying life without the meds. And she showed me that through a lot of meditation techniques, through a holistic approach to my mental health, I really can exist without that. It's just easier to put a Band-Aid on. It's just easier to take the med and fall asleep.
Isn't it always, though? Yeah. It's always easier to take a pill or take a drink. So
yeah. And so this is where a story with substances can come in, because I've had the quality of my life affected negatively because of my choice to use psychedelic drugs, psychedelic medicine like ayahuasca and San Pedro and magic mushrooms and edible marijuana. And I've made the choice now to be sober, and probably sober for the rest of my life. But do you want to talk about your choice or your use of any substances with your mental health?
Sure. I'll just let you hold it. Yeah, so...
She's talking about the cell phone.
Yeah, sorry. Let's just clarify that. No, but... so I am not sober. But I have chosen to use medical marijuana. It has really helped for my mental health personally. Again, I would not suggest, street drugs for that, but for me personally, with my anxiety and PTSD and things like that, with the appropriate use, it has been life-changing and has benefited me both physically and mentally. But it doesn't come without its, negatives as well. And most of those are just, a matter of being self-aware of your own boundaries, your own limits, and also realizing that you're under the influence. Mm-hmm. So, if that's something that you're willing to work through or you're mature enough to handle, then, that's why I've chosen to go down that way for me. But
that's great. And if anybody out there is a 12-stepper, I can say I'm proud to be a 12-stepper, and I've used techniques I've learned from the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and Sexaholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. I've used techniques that I've learned from those meetings to improve my life and to remain sober. And I should also clarify here that I've never intentionally worked all 12 of the steps, because it's a real you got to be dedicated to actually work the steps. That's hard work.
It is.
And you got to have a good sponsor, and it's another cautionary tale. It's difficult to find a sponsor who's really a person of trust who can walk you through free therapy.
Yes.
I mean, that's a danger of these 12-step programs that are free. You're trusting a stranger who's not certified in any professional level to do therapy with you.
Exactly. Yeah. But that's what makes the 12-step successful, is having that accountability, having that partner, and having somebody that can help you through those 12 steps. And anybody, like, again, you said, it's for everybody. You don't have to have an addiction or a struggle to necessarily go through the 12 steps. And I mean, I would even encourage you, if you have family feuds, if you have anything that is, negative in your life, this is a great way to look at it structurally and be able to see it step by step. And it's a good way to work through some things on your own, because you don't have to have somebody, even though it is nice for the accountability. You can buy a 12-step program book and work through it yourself, and it can be life-changing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think the average male libido is enough to be, you could consider yourself a sex addict. I mean, most men desire so much sex.
I think we all have a little bit of sex addict deep down inside us, so can't.
And the more you have, the more you crave. You have sex with 20 different partners, and you'll only want to have sex with 20 more. And it's important, talking about mental health, to clarify today. I don't identify as having bipolar disorder. I identify as being a healthy person, and I have my highs and my lows. Mostly I have highs, and then I rest.
Do you think that it's important to have a label?
I think the label can help in certain situations, but it can also hurt in certain situations. So for me, I ditched the label when I was 24, and it was great. It was exactly what I needed, because from age 21 to 24, I was basically, I was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I saw myself as a person stricken with bipolar disorder. And I figured, okay, every winter I'm going to get really depressed, and then every spring I'm going to bounce out of it and get manic. Mm-hmm. And some of the Christians at Wenatchee Lighthouse, the
Lighthouse. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Lighthouse in Wenatchee, that's a Christian ministry. They really talked me into healing. I mean, they talked not into healing myself, but into opening myself to being healed completely by God of bipolar disorder. Yeah. And I gotta say, there's a colibri. What's the English word for colibri? Hummingbird.
Oh, is that a hummingbird?
There's a hummingbird way up there now.
That little thing?
The little tiny guy. Yeah.
So cute.
Sorry. We're in a nice little setting to be recording a podcast about mental health. We're sitting in nature in a place called Formar.
Mm-hmm. Formar Nature Preserve.
Yeah, in Flint, Michigan. So that's all to say, the Christians, and I do identify as a open-minded Christian today. We went to church together yesterday, and the spiritual community is immensely important for mental health. Mm-hmm. Having people who look forward to seeing you, having social capital, having people who want to know how you are and are there for you if you get sick or your partner gets sick. So, do you want to say anything on the subject of spiritual health when it relates to mental health?
Sure. I mean, there's so much I could say, but growing up in a spiritual aspect, you know, mental health was never talked about growing up. It was not something I was used to. You know, I've heard the terms thrown around, but having a spiritual connection when you have mental health issues can be really vital and really important. Like Preston said, having somebody there that cares about you, having somebody there that understands a little bit deeper beyond just the superficial, you know, therapist or whatever. But I think the other aspect of it too is that it can also be harmful. And people with mental health issues, for me, my mental health issues stem because of the spiritual problems. And so I can't really relate as far as being, how do I explain it? For me to have that spiritual connection isn't important. To me, it's detrimental for my own mental health because I don't...
A spiritual connection with people or...
Okay. With people, okay. With the church. I don't connect with the church or people on a regular basis because of the judgment that I've lived through over the last, 15, 20 years. But I've also had some very, very neat Christian friends who have put aside some of their ideologies or their beliefs to just help someone that's in need, no matter what they believe in or what they're struggling with. And to have that kind of person, just a genuine friend or a, confidant that you can look to, whether it's spiritually or not, is really important. So yes, spiritual help is good. And a lot of the 12-step programs are actually based on being spiritual or having some sort of spiritual nature. And obviously, if that wasn't important, it wouldn't be part of it because it's used around the world everywhere. So, again, if you come from a spiritual background and a more religious background, then I would steer away from that and allow yourself to find yourself outside of that before you have someone come in and help you alongside that. Because I think you're not going to know really what you believe or what you're dealing with until you're outside of it and look at it from the outside. So for me, I took my journey with no spiritual attachment. But the people that did help me were God-fearing Christians, and it was great to have that support. So
yeah, the 12 steps, doing the 12 steps themselves is actually a way to jumpstart a spiritual awakening in yourself. The act of going through the 12 steps and doing each of those thoroughly will actually cause you to have a spiritual awakening. And that's why they're so effective. That's why Bill W. What was the name of the other guy who founded AA?
Yes, I can't remember.
That's why Bill W. wrote or the other guy who started AA. They were geniuses. And one of the founders of AA, I believe, was bipolar. He spent hours on the floor of his office depressed, just in a horrible depressive state. But then he wrote all 12 of the steps in a matter of minutes. He just wrote. So though that's if you're looking for a spiritual solution, and I recommend you do, the 12 steps and the community formed around 12 steps it's a great solution.
And just because it's spiritual doesn't mean it's religious. So don't let that scare you away. You can believe in whatever deity you want to believe in. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's nature or whether it's a person. Yeah. So take it for what you want. That's the beauty of the 12 steps is that's why it works for so many different types of people, and no matter what walk of life you're coming from. So
yeah, and I wanted to just quickly, for anybody who wants to hear them, I'd like to read out all 12 of the steps, so I'm going to do that right now. So the first step is honesty. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable, or you could say we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives had become unmanageable. The second step came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these character defects. Step 7. Humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Step 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of their will for us and the power to carry that out. And step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics or to other addicts and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So there you have it. The brilliant minds, Dr. Bob and Bill W. together created Alcoholics Anonymous, which is an enormously successful program. So, thanks for listening to Cade's Kaleidoscope. This is your resource for holistic health, sobriety, and travel. And if you have anything you'd like to include in this conversation, don't be a stranger. And thank you, Luiza.
Thank you, Preston, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Do you have anything else you'd like to say to the audience of this podcast?
Nope. Stay safe, healthy, and happy.
Thank you so much for listening.
All right,
this is Cade's Kaleidoscope Podcast, your resource for holistic health, sobriety, and travel. My name is Preston Wade. The music you're hearing in the background is called From the Earth by Judson Crane. You can pre-order my first book by checking out. I'm on all the social networks. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and soon TikTok. The links will be included in the show notes. If you would like to have your content sponsored or included in this podcast, you can contact me. My email is Cadespodcast265@gmail.com. Again, the email address is Cadespodcast265@gmail.com. Anybody's welcome to reach out there if you got a question, comment, anything. Please do like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to this podcast, and leave a review. That'll help our algorithm. That'll help make this popular. If you'd like to support this work or this podcast, you can send a tip through Venmo. The address to send through Venmo is pwade72@gmail.com. That's Papa Whiskey Alpha Delta Echo, and then just the number 72@gmail.com. You can also send a tip through Cash App, and the address for Cash App is $Preston Kennedy 72. And if you'd like to send a tip through PayPal, the email is the same as the Venmo one, pwade72@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for supporting us, and hope you have a great day. I'm working on a motto for this podcast, and the first one I've come up with is keep rotating your kaleidoscope.